Welcome everybody to the May 2020 meeting of the Mississippi PowerShell User Group. Tonight we have Jeff Hicks with us, and he'll be presenting Jumping into Windows Terminal. Take it away, Jeff.
All right, thank you. Welcome everyone. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight from wherever you are, which looks like we're in the chat kind of from all over. Tonight I wanted to talk about something that I've been spending a lot of time in lately, and I'm actually having a lot of fun with it, and I've chatted with some people on Twitter about this, and I thought, you know what, I need to probably talk about this in a more formal setting. So I'm hoping this will be the beginning of, a lot more that I do with Windows Terminal, because even though normally I'm a PowerShell guy, or maybe because I'm a PowerShell guy, I am in a console all the time. And for me, Windows Terminal is now my new thing. So I wanted to share with you some reasons why I think you might want to jump into this as well. Let's go through here and take a look here. Now, the Windows Terminal project from Microsoft is not necessarily let me rephrase that. To me personally, I look at the Windows Terminal as the future of the PowerShell console. That is not what Microsoft is necessarily pushing this or positioning this as. This is from my perspective, being a PowerShell guy and using Windows Terminal. So we all know that the traditional PowerShell prompt got a really nice upgrade when we got to Windows 10. We finally got some better Control-C, Control-V. We got transparency, a lot of nice things. My understanding is that a lot of the people who are behind the Windows Terminal project were also kind of behind this Windows 10 command prompt upgrade as well. So the whole team behind the Windows Terminal actually has a bigger portfolio of stuff, but we're just going to look at the Windows Terminal piece. Now, we got the console, we got the traditional legacy console. Sure, it's easy enough to spin up consoles for Windows PowerShell and now PowerShell 7. But I think if you want to streamline your console experience, Windows Terminal will be the right thing for you. And when you get to my demos, you'll see what I'm talking about. So Windows Terminal allows you to have kind of a multi-tabbed approach. You can have multiple tabs to multiple sessions, multiple different types of sessions, all in one kind of single pane of glass, if you will. It's very keyboard friendly. There are lots of keyboard shortcuts. I'm still continuing to learn a lot of these shortcuts. I still mouse around a lot, but I'm starting to get my muscle memory built up for a lot of the keyboard shortcuts. It is very customizable, up to a point. Technically, the product is still in preview, although I think the latest build they're labeling as a release candidate. So yes, there are some things that I think long-term, some customization will be easier, but for the most part, yes, you can customize the look and feel of pretty much all the tabs and how you interact with Windows Terminal. Right now, the best place to get Windows Terminal is from the Microsoft Store. Just go to the Store app. Excuse me. Go to the Store app, search for Windows Terminal, and you should find a screen like this. Now, I've obviously already installed, so I have the launch button there. Install it doesn't take but a few minutes to install. I think the package is like 160 megabytes, so it's not super big. When you install it, then you'll have an AppX package that you can then run like you would any other app that you install from the store. As I said, technically this is still pre-release, although the current release candidate is just that, it's a release candidate. I think they're hoping to finally RTM soon, because I think the latest release candidate is, I want to say RC2, but they're getting close. There is a command line component to this, wt.exe, although I never use it. Technically, there are parameters that you can run from the command line using wt.exe in order to customize it. Personally, I find it kind of kludgy, and it's just as easy to I've got a shortcut on my taskbar. I run as administrator, and up pops my Windows terminal, and then I do everything I need from there. But there is an application if you need. This is an open source project, so it is up on GitHub, and I'll give you the link there. Technically, you can install from GitHub, but if you install from GitHub, you won't get the automatic updates that you do when you install from the Microsoft Store. Once it's installed, as I said, it's an AppX package, so you can run like get AppX package Microsoft.Windows Terminal, and you can see that it is installed. You can see all the little features. You can see where it's installed and all of that. So here's the biggie. This is kind of the first thing. This is something that people kind of were banging on me when I was, trying to get people to let's look at Windows Terminal. This is not a replacement, or it's an alternative for VS Code. So, or even for the PowerShell IC. And this may be just a matter of personal preference or what tools you decide to use for the job. Personally, for me, VS Code or even the IC, back in the day, that was for scripting. That was for writing scripts, writing modules, building code. I did not and would not manage my environment. I would not run all my day-to-day commands in those tools. They're scripting tools. They're not management tools. Some people, though, aren't like that. They open up VS Code and they write their code, and they also use the terminal that's in there to run their commands and do everything that they need to. If that's what you want to do, and if that's your behavior, Windows Terminal is not for you. But if you're like me, and what I think most people should be doing is I need a separate PowerShell console that I run all my code in, that I run my commands in. That can be Windows Terminal. When you need to write scripts and functions and code and do all that scripty stuff, then you go into VS Code or the PowerShell IC if you can't go to VS Code yet. So Windows Terminal works fine as a replacement for the PowerShell console, not for VS Code. So there are some nice advantages, I think, to using Windows Terminal. You fire it up, it's pretty much ready to go right out of the box. You really don't have to do any configuring for it. It will automatically detect all the versions of PowerShell that you have installed. It will detect things like if you got the Windows subsystem for Linux installed, it will detect that. It has a built-in link to use Azure Shell. So a lot of the things that you may already be using, it already will detect and know and use right away, and there's nothing you need to do. So as I said, PowerShell Core, including all of the previews. So if you install preview, PowerShell 7 preview, the preview 1 that's out, it will detect that. And you don't have to really do anything. Windows subsystem for Linux, and it said Azure Shell. Now, what's really cool, and you'll see this when I get to the demo, is you can customize and you can add other shells or other experiences, I guess I'll call them, so that you can use the Windows Terminal app and open up basically these little windows into lots of other really cool things that you might not have considered. You can do things like splitting the panel. So you can have one pane, but it's split into two. It has two different sessions. One could be, say, PowerShell Core, and the other could be Windows PowerShell, and they can be running side by side. They're completely separate, but you can look at them and run them side by side. That's kind of fun. If you install Windows Terminal from the from the Microsoft Store, it will, as new updates come out, it will update automatically in the background. That's kind of nice in one regard. You don't have to worry about going out and checking to see if there's a new update. On the other hand, you could get an update and not know that you have been updated. I have a tool that I wrote that I use, that I'll show you in a little bit, that helps me keep on top of that, because what's happening, especially as we've been going through Windows Terminal through all these builds, is that the product has changed, and the team decides, we need to remodel how we're going to, or restructure how we're going to call these things. And I kind of got burned by this because I've been using Windows Terminal from like the 0.01 days. I was a really early adopter for this. And every time that a new update came out, I was just kind of roll over all of my settings and customizations and stuff. And eventually I got to the point, like with one of the recent releases, where things weren't working. And I talked with the guys on GitHub and they said, oh, wow, you have one of the very rare conditions that you have a pre-0.03 settings that, basically we weren't expecting anyone to have. So I had to, juggle some things around, which, I guess the price I pay for being a really early adopter. But the challenge was, and I since fixed this, was I would get an update and I wouldn't know that it had updated. So I wouldn't know that, oh, they have changed this setting. I need to change something. I'll show you how I handle that. But it is nice. I don't have to worry about updating it. It just does it automatically. Now, there certainly are some disadvantages. As I said, the installation really is only through the Microsoft Store or GitHub. Now, technically, you can install it through Chocolatey. There's some notes on the GitHub repo for the terminal that we'll talk about that. But the Microsoft Store installation is the only way that you'll get the automatic updates. Now we're going to get to the really nitty-gritty part. Everything in Windows Terminal, for better or for worse, runs under a single process. So there's only one app. There's the wt.exe app, and it has a helper app, an openconsole.exe app, but everything runs under a single process. The downside right now is that there's no ability to elevate a new and separate tab. So you either have to run all your tabs non-elevated or all of your tabs elevated. This is a big deal for a lot of people. And I know that the terminal team, there's a comment now saying that for security reasons and design purposes, they're not planning on making this option available, meaning what people really want is I want to launch Windows Terminal as a non-elevated user, and then if I need to launch a separate tab, I want that tab, that new profile, to run elevated. Apparently, ConEMU can do that. I'm not a ConEMU user, so I can't speak to that, but that is the one thing that Windows Terminal cannot do. So if you need that ability, yes, Windows Terminal at this point won't be for you. Although I suspect that within, some indeterminate period of time, they'll revisit this issue because I think they're going to find that more and more people are going to want this, and they're going to have to find a way to make this possible. I've tried to find hacky PowerShell workarounds, but I have not had much luck. So keep that in mind. Everything runs either all elevated or all non-elevated. Now, of course, you can always have two Windows Terminal sessions. You could have one elevated and one non-elevated, just like you can have one elevated PowerShell session and one non-elevated PowerShell session. But, for me, that kind of defeats the purpose of having a single application to do everything in. The other potential disadvantage right now for some people, maybe not for a lot of people watching this, is that all of the configuration, all the customization you do is all done through a JSON file. So when you go to look at settings, Windows Terminal will open up a JSON file using the associated application. So because most of us have VS Code installed, it'll open up in VS Code, which is great because VS Code knows how to handle JSON. It's aware of the schema. You get a lot of autocomplete. It's really nice. If you don't have VS Code installed, it might open just up in Notepad. For people who don't know JSON files or even understand, because the process isn't documented necessarily very well right now. So there can be some trial and error. The JSON is case sensitive. That has burned me more than once. You got to make sure you get your syntax right. So it can be a little cumbersome to try to tweak your settings or customize the settings because it is just a JSON file. I'm hoping, I think a lot of people are hoping, I know I've seen this on the feature request list, that at some point they provide, or the application provides some sort of GUI interface to make it easier to customize things. Although I'll show you a PowerShell module that can help a little bit, but this is a potential disadvantage to the Windows terminal, at least as it stands right now. To manage Windows terminal, I got two PowerShell modules for you. These are both in the PowerShell gallery. MS Terminal Settings is a module that you can install now. It needs to be updated, and I know that people behind it are working on an update because the version that's in the gallery now is using a prior, is expecting a prior setting that in Windows Terminal, and they changed something, so they have to update the module. But at least I'll still show you that. And then the WT Toolbox, that's my module that has a set of PowerShell commands that I use to help me manage things in Windows Terminal. And I'll go through some of those when I get to the demo. Yes, and as I see here in the comment, yeah, I know ConEMU does allow tabs. You can have elevated and non-elevated tabs in the same interface, and that's what people want from Windows Terminal, but it cannot do it at this point. So if that is a critical must-have feature, then Windows Terminal is not going to be the thing for you. All right, any other questions before I get into the demo? All right, so let me see if I can figure out how to.
We do have one question. Jim's asking if settings can be synced.
The settings be synced? Oh, yes, well, sort of. I'll talk about how I do mine. That's a good question. The settings JSON file. Well, I'll get to that. Hold on to that thought. It can be synced, but it would be something that you would have to do, and I'll show you how I do it. So here is the Windows Terminal, and I'm assuming everyone can see the screen here now. So this is my customization for my PowerShell 7 prompt, and I have a tab open for Windows PowerShell, and here's a tab for Windows PowerShell with no profile. And you can see that there are things you can do with transparency. You can add nice little graphics. And let's see here. Let me get my demo list up. What I want to show you here. So a few things here with the modules I was talking about. So I've already installed, so can't type and talk at the same time, MS Terminal Settings. Oh, it's not loaded. And that version, because I just checked just before we started the meeting, just in case there was an update, but there wasn't. So here are some of the commands that you can do. You can look at color schemes and your profiles. None of this really works right now because they have changed the structure of Windows Terminal. So I just have this here as a reminder to keep checking for updates. and then my commands in the Windows toolbox. Well, we'll come through some of these here because the key bindings, there is a bunch of key bindings that you can use. So for example, if I wanted to split the pane and duplicate this Windows PowerShell session, I can do Alt-Shift-D, and now I have a second, and it's loading my PowerShell profile. Here's another. I'm going to split the pane again. If I can get this keyboard to work. And split it once again. So you can have all these, you can go really crazy here. Now, each of these is a separate window, so I can just exit if I'm done. So I can never remember all these keyboard shortcuts, so I wrote this little get WT key binding command to make that a little bit easier for me. And everything in the Windows terminal runs under this Windows terminal process. So right now, these are all of the processes running. So the Open Console is kind of a helper things for the Windows terminal. And then here's my 3 PowerShell sessions that I have open. And I also wrote a command here that will go out and get the latest build. Okay, so the latest build is RC1. And what I have done with this is I have a command called testwt version. And this works by keeping a file in the home directory of the last time I checked to see what the version of the product was. And then whenever I check it again, if the new version is different than the old version, which is what's in the file, then I know that something has updated. Because what I've done, and I need to show you this because I do this over in my Windows 7 profile. Down at the end of my profile, I have some code here that if I'm in Windows Terminal, and you can tell that because there's a built-in variable, environmental variable, this WT_session, then I load my Windows Terminal aware prompt. And then I have here where I'm going to do the test. And if there's a new test, if there's a new version, then I get a little message in my prompt. And I'll also load up the GitHub repo, and so it shows me the release notes. So, and I ran into this the other day when I fired up a new Windows 7 session. The profile ran. I had gotten an update to Windows Terminal, so I saw a little message and immediately opened up to the release notes. So I knew, oh, cool, new version, here's what's new. So now I have a better way of keeping on top of updates and changes, where before it was just updating all the time and I wasn't paying any attention. Now I'm paying a bit more attention. But what you probably want to see how this all works. So let's show you, first I'll show you some of the customizations I have, and I'll show you how I got those things. So I can do things such as open up, say, a DOS prompt. So there's my CMD prompt, and it's got its own little kind of retro color scheme. And I can bring up my WSL, which has PowerShell 7 installed. And again, you can see I've got a background image. I got different colors here. Close those. You can do anything really. Look at this. I have, because Net Shell runs as its own interactive shell, I can basically have Net Shell running. Or how about this? I've got SQL Express installed. So I built a profile that will launch and connect to the SQL Express and change right to the PS drive. So now and again, you can see I've changed the transparency. You can increase the, if I can get this, there we go. Control and the mouse wheel, makes this bigger or smaller. And then there's also a way, I can never remember that keystroke, to also increase the, I must have just did it, the opacity, if you want how transparent you want it to be. Or look at this. Here is, we connect to Fred, which is a Fedora machine on my network. So I basically have opened a PowerShell remoting session over SSH to Fred, and now it's running in a completely separate tab. This part here comes from a Linux profile that I run when I make my connection. And if I needed to, I can do Control C, come over here, Control V, and everything is just in one tab going back and forth. Here is, again, using remoting. This is connecting to the domain controller, and let's try this again. I don't think I can type and talk at the same time. Right, so here is the domain controller in my little test domain, and I have a remoting session to it, and I've changed right to the Active Directory PS drive. I find that really kind of cool stuff. Yes, I could do all those things in my main PowerShell window, but then I'd have to go in and out of it, and whereas now with the Windows Terminal, I have all of these features available to me as I need them, and I can add, as many as I want. What I'm hoping for long term is for a better way to organize the menu. Now, I may be a little crazy on this, but eventually I'm going to want to organize these into folders or some sort. Here is the PowerShell 7 Preview 2 that's out. So all of these settings you can view right here, and this should open up VS Code, and this opens everything up here in a JSON file. So let me scroll down here. When you first install install Windows Terminal without all the customizations, you will get built in these little sections here. And I've gone through and just hidden them because I don't really need to see them. I have created my own profiles. So here's my default, the PowerShell 7 one, where you specify the command line that you want to run. You can specify what you want for backgrounds, whether you want it to be to have that transparency. They call it the acrylic. You do need to give it a GUID, but see, here's where the JSON becomes tricky. For one thing, these settings are case sensitive, so it has to be tab title with go right underneath there, with capital T for title. And the paths have to be escaped. So it does get a little finicky. The profile settings here basically are merged on top of a set of defaults that you also get with the application. This is a design change that they made a couple versions ago that kind of broke things I was doing before. So you have these default values, and then you have all of these values. This file, if you can kind of see up here, is stored under your app data directory, packages, Microsoft Windows Terminal, the code, local state, settings.json. But what I have done as part of my Windows toolbox here is I have created, when you load the module, you'll get two custom variables. WT defaults, this is the JSON file for the default settings, all turned into a custom object. So if you wanted to see, for example, hey, what are the default key bindings, or what are the default settings, and I also do the same thing for WT. So that object are all of my settings. So if I want to be able to look at my settings, but without having to open up the JSON file, there are all the names of all my settings. Because it is just a JSON file, right? It's easy enough to turn into an object. So I've made all of that easy for me to get to. Now, to come back to the question about the synchronization stuff, here's what I do. Let's see if I can show this to you. Let's go to I'm finding the easiest way to do this. So what I have done is the file, I'll come back here, this file here that's under C users, Jeff, app data, local, blah, 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 settings.json. This file here is actually a hard link to this file here in my OneDrive folder. So whenever I'm editing the OneDrive, right here, I can prove this to you here. So right now you can see it's 9:57. Let me make a change. So there we go. So you can see that settings.json file just changed. So even though VS Code thinks I'm editing the file in app data, I'm actually direct linked to the file in OneDrive. So what I can do now is on my other laptop, I can also do the same thing. I can link the Windows Terminal JSON file in app data to the OneDrive location, and I'm good to go. So that's how I can link everything together. You could do a similar thing, I suppose, if you wanted to. Now, what I do, though, you notice here also I've got some settings file. I created a tool, and I'll go ahead and run it now, backup WT setting, that will keep, I think my default is 7, and you can see I just created now, I've got 7 backups. If I run this again tomorrow, it'll renumber and delete the oldest backup So I have a way also of keeping, because I'm always dinking around and tinkering and changing stuff, so I keep backups. If you wanted to send them up to a gist on GitHub, sure, you could do that as well. That would certainly be a possibility. But this is how I handle the synchronization, and because I rely so much now on Windows Terminal, I didn't want to lose anything, and I want to make it easier to get my settings that I use on my laptops that I travel with. So personally, I find that to be a nice, easy way to do that. And I wanted to check this because I don't think it makes right. And just to be clear, Windows Terminal is not like VS Code or the IC. It's not technically hosting PowerShell, so there is no separate profile for Windows Terminal in terms of PowerShell. That's just the normal PowerShell profiles. Let's see, what else I wanted to show you. Oh, in case you're curious about the remoting ones. So here's my Fred going to the Fedora box. So the command line is just basically running PowerShell core and then just running a script file, WTPS remote, that will make all the connection, does all the stuff I need behind the hood, and I have a parameter to specify a remote profile. So basically I'm creating a session and then running the code that's in this profile script on the remote machine. I also have Wilma here. You can also do just straight SSH. So let's come back here to this one. I don't have keys set up, so I have to put in the password, which I typed wrong. Let's try this password. There we go. So now I have an SSH session set up, all in one thing that I can move around, and I can follow these things with me wherever I go. So I just love all this. When done, you can just close these things, do exit. Now, what I should do here is I have a note, because technically I have a PS session open, so now I can remove that. I haven't done much with the splitting, but that's kind of a nice, useful thing. So I spend a lot of time and do a lot of my day in VS Code. I'm sorry, not in VS Code, in Windows Terminal. And because I'm writing functions and scripts and stuff, and sometimes I want to say, okay, let me quickly test it in the console in PowerShell 7. Let me test it in Windows PowerShell. Let me test it without a profile. So I have one pane. I just go back and forth and test it in whatever I need to test in it, and it works really quite nice. Questions over any of that? Resume the slides here. So all of the code that I showed you, including a copy of my profile, at least as it was a couple days ago, all little code snippets that I use to generate those remoting pieces are all at that bit.ly link as a gist on GitHub. I'm blogging. You can read about some of my other projects with Windows Terminal on my blog. The GitHub link is the roadmap for Windows Terminal, which is makes for some interesting reading. And then Kayla Cinnamon is the PM, and she's got this nice little introduction from last year about Windows Terminal that talks about it. Those may be things that you will find of interest. And that was really kind of what I had to show you. I wanted to maybe get you excited about Windows Terminal in the way that I'm excited about it. But questions, comments, what do you think? Is this something that you want to look into? Is anyone using Windows Terminal?
Well, I haven't been using Windows Terminal yet, but I think I'm going to change that. I didn't realize that there was the option to do tabs. That's really handy.
Yeah, Jim's asking, can we launch multiple tabs on startup? I have not found a way. You pick one profile as the default, and that will launch. Now, technically, what you could do is and that's a good question. I may have to play with that. Let's say you're starting with a PowerShell profile as your default. You could, in your profile script, well, no, I bet that won't work, because you can call the wt.exe command line tool and tell it to open up profiles, but I don't think it will detect and open it up in the same application, because I think that has come up on the GitHub as an issue. So that'd be a nice little feature to add, to be able to open up multiple tabs. Yeah, so the changes in the settings, because it used to be, the file name used to be called profiles or profile.json, and then they changed it to settings.json, which is why that MS Terminal app or module needs to be updated, because they're still referencing the file that doesn't exist anymore. Well, it would have been nice. They could have probably come up with some way to shim that, but they didn't. Yeah, and you don't have to give up, all your other Windows PowerShell sessions. This is just another tool that you can use and kind of get a feel for. I mean, I spend my week at a PowerShell prompt. That's pretty much the first thing I fire up when my computer pretty much never gets turned off. But I do everything. I run my entire day through a PowerShell prompt. So once I saw Windows Terminal when it was first announced last year, I was really intrigued about having something new. Especially loved all the tabbed interface to be able to do all of my console stuff from one application. And now that I've gotten more and more into it and understood about how the files work and be able to linking and backing up and have my own little tool set, now I'm even more really taken with it and finding more and more ways to push it. ConEMU lets you highlight a vertical column. Yeah, I don't think that Windows Terminal is laid out the same way for that, to do columns or anything like that. I think it's just its own thing. Now, a lot of people are the color schemes, and be able to set graphics. You can do graphics. What I actually have here. So in my PowerShell 7, you'll notice I've got a little graphic down here at the bottom. There's Happy Joey. And in my profile, I have a little script that runs, or the prompt, my PowerShell prompt, that every 10 minutes, it cycles through a thumbnail of PowerShell themes. Let me see if I can run this script that the prompt calls. Yeah, so every once in a while, every 10 minutes, if I hit enter in my PowerShell prompt in Windows 7 in here, then I get another little smiling PowerShell face. So that's kind of fun. I mean, if I'm going to be looking at PowerShell every day, I might as well, have some fun with it. So I've got code that puts in my calendar. As you can see here, I've got a little time. I got Snover smiling up at me. Other questions or thoughts? Or anything else that you want to see? I feel like I kind of flew through a lot of that demo stuff.
Good evening, Jeff. How did you make the calendar appear in Windows Terminal?
That is there's a module of mine called PS Calendar. This is up on the PowerShell gallery. And there is a command in there called Show Calendar. And Show Calendar has a way of specifying where you want to position it on the screen. And in my prompt or profile, oh, actually, it's in the PS Terminal 7 prompt. And this file, too, is up in that GitHub gist that has all of the code here. So here is my calendar. There's the show calendar command. And I'm positioning it. And I calculate my position by figuring out where I want it to be positioned up on the screen. So this took some trial and error. So that's what this code here about defining the buffer cell, defining a rectangle for the host, then setting the buffer contents and figuring out where to position that. So $left. So that's how I position all of that. So every time that my screen runs, if I keep hitting enter, it always refreshes up in that upper corner. Now, it can be kind of a nuisance because it will, overwrite stuff. So it's not necessarily a perfect thing, but most of the commands I run don't go over that far. And if I needed to, I could always, make my terminal window wider. I have really big monitors, so that's not that big a deal. But yeah, so the calendar, that's my calendar. But you can get the calendar module and you can use the show calendar or even just and I've got some built-in default parameter values that know what dates are important to me, so that's why they're color-coded. So here's today's date, and I have events coming up on the days that are in green. So, like I said, as you can see, I spend my entire day in PowerShell. So I make my console, in this case Windows Terminal, to be as friendly and as useful to me as I can.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. Yeah, and actually, I mean, there is some documentation. It's not, to be honest, it's not extensive yet. So I have figured out a lot of stuff on my own just through trial and error or just posting stuff as an issue in the GitHub repo. We'll see. Yeah, I'm not expecting huge changes now between what we have today and when they go to version 1. I'm assuming they'll just make the version number jump to 1.0, but we'll have to see. So let me I'll bring this back up in case anyone wants to take a note or screenshots or anything. Well, I think Dave will post or share some of these links later with the recording.
One other question, Jeff. I apologize for interrupting.
No.
With Windows Terminal, do you know if there's any plans of supporting previous builds other than 1903?
Oh, I have no idea. Does it not work on older builds?
No, you have to have build 1903 on it, and it requires, I think it requires C++ because that's the.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some. Yeah, I've seen some reference to some C++ runtime, and I don't know. Maybe that runtime has a dependency on the 1903. You could always post an issue in the GitHub repo. I doubt they will. I doubt that would be high priority to make it backwards compatible. And yeah, I don't know what the current Windows 10 LTS release is. Yeah, I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt they would make it backwards compatible. I think they have enough on their plate now just trying to keep up with things that seem to still break. I'm still trying to find, other ways to push it and add more kind of cool. I've got a profile that I hid for like just even NSLookup, so I can have a dedicated NSLookup screen. Anything that you could do in a console at a prompt, you could create a dedicated profile to it, so that doesn't then interfere with your daily driver profile. And that's why I'm going to need, firstly, I'm going to need some way to organize profiles because I'm going to have probably way too many profiles.
I see Jim had a question too about does the MS Terminal settings module help with authoring or modifying the settings.json file?
I think they do. I think it's supposed to. Let me come back here.
I do it anyway, but these
Yeah, so there is set MS. My fingers are tired. Yeah, so I think the plan is that you should be able to use this module to modify the JSON file. Now the downside is what it has to do, because I think I've looked at this code, and I started playing with this too early on before I found this module, is that you basically have to rewrite the entire JSON file or do some sort of regex find and replace to go in the text file. So you're always updating the entire JSON file. But this is much nicer to have a command to do that and more user-friendly than having to do it in VS Code. So I will probably start looking at this more once they update this module. so that it reflects the new settings.json. Or, the Windows terminal team will need to provide some sort of GUI interface into settings to avoid having to get into the JSON. VS Code was like that too. The early VS Code customizations, you were always just tweaking JSON files. And then eventually they added a little GUI, overlay for a lot of the common stuff, so you didn't have to get into the JSON. Because, not everyone is a JSON expert as much as like Jim Burley is. So if you've got JSON questions, contact Jim. He'll help you.
Yeah, no. Thanks for the response, Jeff. Yeah, I'm bit by this globals being removed, breaking change. And
yeah,
my settings, I mean, it's not the biggest of deals. It's just right now it's just a pop-up when it launches, and I can click out of it, and surprisingly everything still kind of works, but there's an issue out there on GitHub. Yeah.
Did you basically make a backup copy of your old settings, then delete?
Yeah, I'm mucking with it. I'm mucking with it as we speak, Jeff. I'm literally trying to do it, and I'm getting all kinds of errors. I'm like, I hate JSON.
Yeah, so what I ended up doing was I basically made a backup copy of my current settings file. Then I deleted the settings file, and then then I started up Windows Terminal from scratch, or fresh. And let it create a brand new file with all the settings, and then I went back in and then added my customizations back into that.
That makes sense. I'm going to do that. Yeah, I did make a backup copy, and I did start editing another copy, but I like the idea of letting it build one from scratch.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, because they had made so many changes, and that's what I was running into, is that my profile had all these ancient settings that the app didn't know anything about anymore. And they've gone to this idea of this defaults.json, which you don't want to touch. And then anything that you want to customize goes into your settings.json, and they basically then get kind of merged together. And whatever settings that were last applied take over. So if you had like two key bindings, or if you defined a key binding in settings.json that used the same keystrokes that were in default, my understanding is that the one that you set in settings.json, your personal one, that's the one that will win. And that's the approach I took with my get wt key binding command. Is it looks at the JSON, or looks at the default key bindings, and then looks at your key bindings and lays them on top, and then you basically get a composite. If there are duplicates, your settings win. For a lot of people, most of you aren't going to go as crazy with settings and customizations as I am. I'm just kind of warped that way. I always want to see how much can I push this thing. I think for a lot of you, you'll fire up Windows Terminal. You'll see, there's Windows PowerShell, there's PowerShell 7, there's PowerShell Preview, and you'll be good to go. Yes, maybe you might go back in, you might adjust, say, you know what, I need this font to be a little bit bigger. Or it would be nice to have a little background picture. But those are just cosmetic things that you can add in at a much later time. They have no impact on your functionality. The fact that I have, Ms. PowerShell here in my profile, for one, it helps me a visual clue that, if I see this, I know that I'm in my Windows PowerShell no profile setting. If I see this color, I know, oh, this was my regular Windows PowerShell as admin. You can see I've got tabs up here, and you can customize the appearance of tabs. You can override those tabs because, like in PowerShell, if I wanted to change the host so you can modify those as well. So like if you had that in your profile, you can adjust the tabs. Now if I close this and open it up again, then I'll get the default settings again. And you can customize things like the icons, but that's all cosmetic. That just helps you kind of keep track of what you're looking at. The functionality is really a lot of the core functionality is built in right out of the box, or as soon as you install it and start running the app. Which I'm hoping a lot of you will start doing tomorrow, and then ping me on Twitter and say, hey, this is cool, or this really sucks, or how do I do this? And let me know what you're thinking and how it's working out for you.
So Jeff, I apologize about the
go
off-topic
ahead.
question, but you use VS Code. Is there a way to run within the PowerShell extension both 5.1 and 7?
In VS Code?
Yes.
No, I don't think so. I mean, you can pick different sessions, but you can't run them side by side.
Thank you.
But see, that's where something like, like this could come in handy. Is I could do, if I can remember my keystroke here. Nope, that's not what I want. All right, so now I've got Windows PowerShell and PowerShell 7. And so if I'm writing some function or some script or something in VS Code, and I want to test it in both, I can write the code in VS Code and then jump over here and run the command, and I can see them side by side. So, I mean, to me, if I wanted a quick way to run code and test it in multiple shells, I would probably do it this way. And because this would be the better test anyway, because you really, you don't want to trust that. This is always a problem in the IC because everything in the IC ran in the global scope. So any testing that you ran, you were suspect to you making mistakes. You always wanted to test your code finally in an actual console. And I still carry over that behavior from VS Code. Yeah, I may quickly say, hey, okay, does this work? But for real testing, I still need to run that code in an actual console session. I'm not going to trust that it works in VS Code. Because I've still seen, even though they've made some great improvements into the PowerShell extension, it can still be a little wonky for me. I don't know if it's just me, but sometimes I go, wow, I've been in too long. I don't know what. So I'm always going to be testing my code in a console, and now I have the ability to do something like this with multiple side-by-side screens. That's killer for me. And that may be a better approach for you anyway. But that's a good question. Anything else?
No, sounds like that's it.
I think everyone's nodded off. Well, it's late.
Well, thank you for Thank you for presenting for us, Jeff.
Welcome. I will.
Jeff.
So you've got the links. You all know how to find me on Twitter. So if you've got questions or anything, just kind of look for me. Hope you give it a go. Let me know what you think. See how it works for you. And if you've got comments or suggestions or problems, please use the issues in the GitHub repo. I have found the people there to be very responsive. So the stuff that you post, they're getting back to people pretty quickly. So it's not like you're going to post a question and just have it hang out there and go stale or anything like that. So with that, I will stop sharing and turn this back over to our friends to the north.